Hey there, welcome into Unpaid Interns. I'm Griffin Epstein, and the madness, well, it's upon us. 3 days already complete in March Madness. We have had a doozy of upsets, some great games, and all taking place right here in the state of Indiana. It's been a lot of fun to watch on TV so far, and know a lot of people's brackets are busted, but we're going to help try to sort through the madness. We have a great guest today. Jackson Yeary joins me. He's a men's basketball reporter for the Hoosier Network and a lifelong Hoosier who I'd imagine, Jackson, you've enjoyed seeing the whole tournament so far in Indiana. It's been fun to watch so far.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I mean, when I think about it, it's pretty wild that, this year going into the season, didn't even know if the tournament was going to be able to happen after what happened last year. And just to see it all, come together, we get the tournament back number one is what's so great. And then for it to be in my home state and get to see all these arenas that I'm so familiar with has been pretty tremendous. I tweeted it out on Friday, but just for example, it's so funny because I watched some of the first round games and they're in the Indiana Farmers Coliseum, and if you're not from here, you might not be familiar with that. But I mean, that's where IUPUI and the Indy Fuel play. But I mean, that's also where my high school graduation was. So I see, Ayo DeSuma and Kofi Coburn out there playing, as a one seed, and I'm like, oh well, I was just walking across there a few years back. So it's been awesome. I've really enjoyed this.
And before we kind of get to some of the games and break down everything that's happened the last couple of days, I mean, this is the first time we've seen, and obviously in weird pandemic conditions, but all the games essentially happening around one metro area, 68 schools all gathered. A lot of people, I think, are having very, positive reactions to it so far. Do you think it's something the NCAA could look at in the future or should look at in the future of having all their games kind of around one bubble site?
I think it'd be something to consider for sure. I think when we get more normalcy and potential for full crowds, I think it'd be really fun to experiment with it then and see how people feel. Obviously, this year's different, but if we had kind of like a normal setup with the whole one site thing, I think it'd be good to test out and see how people feel about that because I think that'll give a more full perspective of how the two compare.
It's certainly been a unique season, and I mean, that's translated to some games, as I mentioned, some surprising upsets, some bracket busters. What's just your reaction overall to what's happened on the court first 2 days?
I mean, I think it's just kind of absurd because there's so many upsets that, you get so captivated by one and then you're already thinking about the other. On the Friday when we opened up, it was all Oral Roberts, and deservedly so because they were the only 15 seed that won. And then the next day, Abilene Christian wins late, and everyone's attention's on Abilene. And then we're back to Oral the next day, but we also had, Oregon State getting to the Sweet 16, Loyola beating Illinois. It's almost like it's hard to keep track, but it's been all the more fun. I just wish that we got, a few more buzzer beaters. We've only gotten the one Virginia Tech 3 to tie it to go to overtime, but I'd like to see some crazy finishes. We've had some really close games on the wire, but I want a few more buzzer beaters for sure.
Jackson's not satisfied with all these close games yet. Needs more excitement.
Yeah. I get greedy when the NCAA tournament's back after having, a year without it. I've got high expectations.
That's fair. It's been a relief to have it back because I think a lot of us forgot how fun. I mean, especially these first couple of days, or when you got 16 games on your TV for over 12 hours, you go to sleep, you wake up in an hour, and the games are starting again.
I know my productivity has been terrible this weekend because my eyes have been glued to the TV. But I mean, it's a once a year tradition, and I loved it. And I've been waiting so long, like in January, December. Yeah, I mean, this sounds crazy. And this goes to show how much of a geek I am. But I was watching old selection shows from 2019 and 2018 because I just couldn't wait for Selection Sunday and getting to see the bracket on the screen and the anticipation and everything. I missed it so much, and the fact that not only was it canceled last year, but we were 3 days away from Selection Sunday. For it to be canceled right then and there, I think that makes it all the more difficult not to have it. So it's been so satisfying this year.
I want to hit on one team you mentioned, and maybe the biggest surprise so far of the tournament, Loyola of Chicago taking down the number one seed, and many people, including myself, had them winning the national championship, Illinois. Not only did they lose to Loyola, but I mean, Loyola Chicago really had control of that game throughout. How have how has Porter Moser, I mean, been able to build a team that suddenly looks like a consistent contender? And how far do you feel the Ramblers can go now in the tournament?
I think it's really interesting because I think when they made the Final Four a few years ago in 2018, it was almost as if, this is the most amazing Cinderella story ever. I'm not trying to compare them to other amazing underdogs in NCAA tournament history, but that's kind of what the narrative was, Cinderella story. But he's used that momentum from that 2018 run and recruited really well for the Missouri Valley level and has created like an even better team than he had a few years ago. So, anything can happen, but it's almost like this team is more well composed and they aren't getting by because the first two games they won in 2018 to get to the Sweet 16 were both off of buzzer beaters. And then this year, I mean, it didn't dominate Georgia Tech, but took care of them handedly. And then he pretty much dominated Illinois for like 40 minutes. So Porter Moser has, taken his, excellent coaching that he had a few years back and then put in a new, roster, a new group that is a little bit step above, I think, talent-wise. And then you have Cameron Krutwig, who's become one of the best players in the country as a senior. And it's clicking on every level. And, now their region got a little crazy. They play Oregon State in the Sweet 16, which I'm sure very few people expected. And then they'll get the winner of Syracuse-Houston after that. And, just on paper, before the tournament, it might have sounded crazy to say, yeah, Loyola's going back to the Final Four. But I think there's legitimate reason to believe they could go back to the Final Four. And, depending on who they play, if they were to get there, and now granted they could lay an egg against Oregon State, but they have the opportunity to get to the Final Four. And, who knows after that? Because I like you, Griffin, I was extremely high on Illinois. I thought they were the best team in the tournament, and I had them winning as well. So if they knock them out, and they didn't just knock them out because they got lucky, they took Illinois out of that game. That was really dominant, impressive. I think Loyola, they can do it if they really just stick to their game plan.
I'm curious because you kind of mentioned, you see a lot of teams make a Cinderella run. You think of George Mason back in the day. Florida Gulf Coast is another team of a little bit more recently in Dunk City that have made those Cinderella runs, either to the Sweet 16 or all the way to the Final Four, but they don't typically follow it up with consistency. But there are a couple names. I kind of think of a Butler, a team that through some, a small Midwest school suddenly had some NCAA tournament runs, now plays in a major conference. Wichita State's another team. Is Loyola potentially a school, especially if Porter Moser sticks around in Chicago, that, could potentially take that leap to, say, an American conference or a higher level and be a consistent contender?
I think that's the number one thing that you brought up is the conference, because when you look at what Butler and Wichita State have done in those two examples, Butler had back-to-back national title appearances in 10 and 11. And then after that, they had, I think, one more year in the horizon. And then they were in the Atlantic 10 in 12-13. Then they moved to the Big East in 13-14. So, I mean, that elevated their brand so much. And you're playing competition amongst the likes of, Xavier, Villanova, Creighton. And that does so much to boost your profile. And Wichita State obviously, has roots in the MVC like Loyola is right now. But then, they ended up moving on to the American, as you mentioned, and, that boosts their profile and it changes recruiting. So if Porter Moser stays and they stick to it, I certainly think they can continue to be the class of the MVC if they were to stay there. But if they were to take a step up, whether that be to an Atlantic 10 or potentially the American, I think that could do wonders for them too. I think the logical step for them would be the next one up, I guess, would be the A10, just because, they don't have the football component, but granted, Wichita State doesn't either, and that doesn't impact the American. But I think the logical next step up for them would be to go to the A10. If that works out, they could go even further. But it's really interesting because some of these schools are very happy where they are. And if you are Loyola, do you risk, taking a step back against higher competition year in, year out? Or do you want to continually win the MVC and guarantee NCAA tournament appearances? And I guess it's just it's up to how Moser feels. It's up to the AD. And, it could be even, Moser could get a new job after this year, but it seems like he's pretty content where he's at.
Yeah, I know at least some Indiana fans were throwing around his name as a potential hire for Scott Dolson in Bloomington. Speaking of the Big Ten, that has been another big storyline through the first couple days of the NCAA tournament. Most people considered it the best conference in basketball in the regular season. They got 9 teams into the NCAA tournament, and now we're just 3 days in. They only have 3 teams left, and it could be even less by the end of 24 hours, depending on what happens with Iowa, Maryland, and Michigan. We've kind of seen this same story before with the Big Ten when they have a lot of really good teams. They enter March and they fall flat. Why does this keep on happening, Jackson?
So I think this is probably one of the most interesting parts of this tournament. And on, paper, like the upsets are going to get the attention, but I think this is a really pressing issue for the conference. I think that kind of the bully ball style of, extreme physicality, low possession, kind of more old-fashioned way of scoring and offense. It's depleting when they get to March because, you start out, the Big Ten obviously has plenty of talent. And in the non-conference, when it's early on, talent kind of wins out. And then when you get to the Big Ten, all of those teams get into these styles of how the Big Ten plays, where, once again, the physicality, kind of lower scoring. There are exceptions to that. And then you get to March, and they go against a style they're not used to, and they can't adapt. And that's why we're seeing some of these upsets, I feel like, because they get punched in the mouth, and then, they realize they have to totally adjust their game plan, and then they struggle to catch up a little bit. I think part of this, can be thrown on particularly Purdue and Ohio State because it opened, first day, and then that got all the attention. So maybe it's overblowing things a bit, but I think the struggles are real, and I think it shows year in, year out. But I think the other thing is, this Big Ten conference, like you said, everyone was talking about this could be the best year of the Big Ten ever. But no matter how good the Big Ten is every year, it seems that only 2 Big Ten teams are kind of guaranteed to go far in every year, and that would be Michigan State and Michigan. Obviously, Michigan State wasn't the same this year. So I'm curious what Michigan does because they typically don't crumble under March pressure. They almost always get to the second weekend. So I'm curious if they follow that narrative or not. But I think the Big Ten has some serious style of play issues that they need to address if they want to be more on the forefront. And I know that the Big Ten's stubborn and they don't want to bow down to anybody, but going with more of, I think, like a Big 12 style of play, and this is something that takes years to adjust to. This doesn't happen overnight. I think that'll set themselves up better for the tournament. But, it is possible that it's just a byproduct of the craziness of March too.
Yeah, there was also, there were so many quality Big Ten teams, very few cupcakes. You kind of wonder. At one point, I saw someone, I think, put out on Twitter, most conferences are playing an 18-game schedule. They're playing a 20-game schedule. Just being worn down. Is that playing a factor at all?
That's a fair perspective too. I think that may explain a lot because, the other part of this is, and you can say this for any conference, but, with the Big Ten technically being the quote unquote best this year, they're tired. They're playing a lot of good teams in short time, and they didn't have a regular non-conference against some of those cupcake schools to help boost their record a little bit and then just help them grow. But the Big Ten changed from 18 to 20 games, I believe, in the 18-19 season. And if you look at how that tournament turned out, Michigan State got to the Final Four. Purdue was in the Elite Eight. But I believe those were the only 2 Big Ten teams to make it to at least the Elite Eight. And I'd have to think back further for who made the Sweet 16. And then we didn't have a tournament last year. So this year, I guess, is year 2, really, of seeing how the 20-game schedule impacts March. And if things go awry for Michigan, Maryland, Iowa, I don't expect Maryland to advance very far. So it's really, I think, on the backs of Michigan and Iowa to prove this stuff wrong. But, if the Big Ten can't get a Final Four team in the year where they're supposedly, potentially best year in the conference or best year in a long time, then I think that it may be cause for concern. I think that if you're the Big Ten, theoretically, and I know that March is crazy, you have to get at least one Final Four team every year. That has to be the goal because, for as much talk as it gets and for as much of a brand as it is, if you can't get a team to the Final Four, I think that's just, it goes against what you're doing, and it goes against this persona that you try to bring to the whole brand of college basketball.
It's certainly been a struggle so far for the Big Ten the first few days of March Madness. Now, kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, there's a conference that gets continuously ridiculed and made fun of. They are having a great March. The Pac-12 is 6-0. You mentioned Oregon State with the late night upset last night of Oklahoma State. They got a couple more teams playing today looking to advance to the Sweet 16. I mean, what's happening in the Pac-12? Should people start respecting them and stop making fun of them?
I think the Pac-12's been honestly a lot of fun all year, and I think people were a little bit too hard on them. 100%. I mean, there wasn't like a team that was worthy of a 1 seed or anything, but there's a lot of talent out there. Regardless of how high level, that's one thing. But like you mentioned of Oregon State, and they're kind of the feel good story. But I mean, USC's been good all year, and they've got talent up and down the board. UCLA's kind of turned it on as of late, but they've been pretty fun all year too. And I think that the Pac-12's, I guess, just kind of figured it out. And there are other teams that I can mention in there for this tournament. Oregon obviously advanced due to VCU's COVID issues. But I think back, a few years ago in 2018-19, that tournament, I think that Pac-12 had 3 teams get in. It was Arizona State as a play-in, and they lost in the play-in game. And then they had Washington, and then they had Oregon, who won the Pac-12 tournament but would have gotten in otherwise. And I guess they've just found a nice balance where they have a handful of pretty solid teams, and obviously they can't control the outcomes of the games, but they just have a really good host of schools that compete hard and they recruit well. I didn't even mention Colorado. They're having one of their best years in forever this year, and I think that they'll beat Florida State today and move on. But they have really solid teams and groups, and I just think it's because of the time difference, and they don't necessarily, have the Big Ten. They have the Pac-12 network, but it doesn't have the same feel as the Big Ten network. It's a little newer. And I think people are just too quick to judge and sleep on them because of recent years maybe. But, I mean, if you've been watching all year, these teams, this isn't a surprise. They've been good all year for sure.
It feels good to me as a West Coast guy, and all the hate I get coming here and say I'm a Pac-12 fan, and to finally throw it in their face in the Midwest and see the Pac-12 succeed. It's really warmed my heart the last couple of days.
I'm sure it has, and deservedly so. You've got bragging rights, and just know that when it comes to throwing the shade back at others, I've been a supporter of the Pac-12. I like the Pac-12, so don't toss any of that my way. I love it.
All right, I won't be mean to you, Jackson. I appreciate the support.
Yeah, of course.
Well, want to turn to the other 1 seed that played yesterday. Illinois fell. Baylor, some people thought might have a challenge against the hot shooting Wisconsin team out of the Big Ten. Didn't end up being too much of a difficulty. It's been an interesting year for Baylor, a team that looks so dominant, had a COVID pause for almost 21 days, and hasn't really looked the same since. But yesterday, a pretty impressive performance against Wisconsin. They cruise into the Sweet 16. Is this the team that's finally regaining its pre-COVID form and is a threat to win the national title?
I think so. I think you're right. I think they look a little bit more pre-pause Baylor Bears, and that's all really good for them. Very dominant. Granted, I'm going to be really interesting with how they respond from here forward, because I mean, when they played Hartford's a 16 seed. They're supposed to dominate. And this Wisconsin team, they're experienced, but they came into the tournament so slow and so they're limping in pretty much. And the North Carolina obliteration I did not see coming. But I think that with Wisconsin, they weren't, I guess, the best test for Baylor. So now moving forward, I have to wonder, do they get challenged a little bit more? And this will be telling if, how much are they back. But I certainly think that they have all the tools and all the talent to move forward and potentially compete for a national title game. I think, honestly, the biggest thing for them is just mentally getting over the hump, because Scott Drew has been to the Elite Eight at least once, potentially twice, but I believe once. And he's never made that first Final Four. And I understand that the talent is there, but there's just something about coaches having to break through and finally make that Final Four. And we'll see if they've got the fortitude to do it.
It's interesting who they're playing. I was just peeking at the bracket. They have Villanova
Mm-hmm.
coming up next weekend, and that's a team no one really came into the tournament talking about. Connor Gillespie, their best player, a season-ending injury. They crushed North Texas last night, a game not really anyone was watching because there were so many other close games. I mean, do you think they could be a threat to Baylor? Is this, is Jay Wright going to do it again and Nova's going to come out of nowhere and go back to the Final Four?
I can't. I don't think I can. I don't think this Nova team is a normal like Nova team from years back that won it. I think without Gillespie, that really takes all hope out for a potential Final Four. And I think Baylor will probably take care of them. Granted, Villanova is obviously, as you said, like they're on a roll as they dominated North Texas and they took care of one through. But I think that Villanova more so got lucky with the fact that, I mean, obviously they're going to play Winthrop to start, but after that, they got lucky that Purdue got upset by North Texas because I think Purdue just laid an egg to North Texas, and that kind of gave Villanova a free ride to the Sweet 16. And you see that happen, year after year sometimes with teams. But I just don't think this Villanova team is quite equipped to go, super far. They've kind of, even before Gillespie got hurt, they were reeling a little bit. And I think Baylor should take care of them. And as much fun as Oral Roberts has been, I think it'll be Baylor, Arkansas in the Elite Eight. And I think that game will be a lot of fun to determine who goes to the Final Four.
Yeah, Arkansas and Eric Musselman playing very well. Another team that is playing very well right now is Syracuse. Buddy Boeheim, I mean, every time you look up, he's hitting a three. Even when Syracuse isn't playing, it seems like he's hitting threes. This is a team that also kind of feels like every March they come out of nowhere, barely sneak into the tournament, and they're busting everyone's brackets. How does Jim Boeheim do it every year? How much of the threat or an orange in a Midwest bracket that we've talked about has really been beat up a lot of lower seeds?
It's pretty amazing what Boeheim does year in, year out. There was a while where they were really, on the top of their game, and they weren't getting, these super high seeds, or I mean, they weren't getting low seeds. They were getting high seeds. Like in 2011, they got a 3 seed, and I believe they went to the Sweet 16. And then in 2012, they got a 1 and made the Elite Eight, which was great. And then they like kind of started to trail off for some reason as they got good seeds. Like in 2014, they got a 3, lost around a 32 to Archie Miller's Dayton team, which is funny looking the connections there. But I guess they just like to have the low seeds now. I mean, I guess it's a chip on their shoulder, or it takes them all season to figure it out, and then they turn it on. The zone in March is it's an anomaly. Someone needs to do like a 30 for 30 on that, because like, they have a bubble resume all season, and then the zone is just masterful against these teams. They don't know what to do with it. And obviously Indiana fans talk about that all the time with 2013. But the zone works well, and I think they're a threat for sure, just as much as anyone in that region, because they shoot the heck out of the ball. And it's not just Boeheim. They've got other shooters. Joe Girard is a tremendous shooter. And if they're hot right now, if they can just continue to be hot, then I don't see any reason why they couldn't, because you also just look at who they play. And Houston has a 2, and Houston has had to try to work over this label of being overrated and from the American. And if they were to beat them, then they'll play either Loyola or Oregon State. So that's a guarantee of either an 8, 11, or a 12 seed in the Final Four. So I think as long as Syracuse keeps shooting the way it does and the zone shows up, then I think they've got as good a chance as anyone.
Is it with the zone that there's so little time to prep in the NCAA tournament, especially on that second game where you only have one game in between it? Is that why every year it causes so many problems?
I think that's part of it because, like you said, so little time to prep. You're already fatigued after the first game. And I think for Syracuse, the challenge is just getting through round 1 and then, having that zone for the next 2 days after or whatever will do really well for you. I think part of it as well is, most teams don't really get thrown a zone look very often, regular season, tournament, whenever. It's college basketball. Everyone is an elite athlete at this point. It's expected to go man to man. Just that's the norm. At the same time, there are zone looks that come, but most teams don't sustain that for a whole game. It's usually for a specialized set of time, or if something's not working and they just have to experiment a little bit. But it's just so absurd to see, and something that goes against the norm of college basketball, that I think it puts teams and a little bit of a state of shock. They just don't know how to react. And then with the nerves of the tournament mixed in and everything, I think it's kind of just a culminating effect that throws people off.
It has been a great run so far for Syracuse. Want to shift our attention to some games today. And so a little weird, we're playing NCAA tournament games on a Monday. And Oregon, Iowa was starting in a little over an hour on Monday at noon, which is very strange. But we got a bunch of double-digit seeds, 4 double-digit seeds playing today. We had 3 double-digit seeds win yesterday to advance to the Sweet 16. If you had to pick, we're going to have at least 1 double-digit seed with UCLA and Abilene Christian playing. But I guess out of these 4, if you had to pick one to keep on making a run, be a Cinderella, who are you picking?
So are we including just today's double-digit seeds?
Just today's, yeah. So
Okay.
UCLA, Abilene Christian, Maryland, and Ohio.
I'd say the best chance. Okay, so I want to say I think UCLA will beat Abilene, and I kind of count them in that Cinderella category, but they're UCLA, so 11 titles. It's hard to consider them a Cinderella, but I think Ohio honestly has the best chance. I think Maryland's got a tough task with Alabama, and then we just talked about Abilene, but I think Ohio, it makes sense because they'll get to play Creighton. And I haven't really been high on Creighton all year. I think they should have lost to UCSB. And UCSB just missed that layup like last second. And with that going down, then, the task gets a little easier for Ohio in theory. But they just kind of have that feel-good story to them. Preston, the point guard, obviously has gotten a lot of attention, and he's got an incredible story of how he worked so hard to get here. But, Ohio's also not this isn't totally new to them. They had a Sweet 16 in 2012 as a 13 seed, which is their seed again now. I think that they totally could move on to the second weekend and continue this story. I think they've got the best odds out of today's double-digit teams.
Overall, 8 games today. What game, when people are tuning into their TVs, maybe could finally see that buzzer beater? What are you paying attention to?
So I've got 3 in mind that I think could be the best games of the day. Kansas USC, which is the nightcap. I think that one could be really fun. Granted, Kansas is still coming off those COVID issues and had a little trouble with Eastern Washington. But I still think that's just a really good matchup. A lot of talent there both ways. And then Colorado, Florida State, I think should be a lot of fun too. 2 teams that aren't blue bloods, and Florida State obviously has had a lot of success in recent years, but 2 teams that I guess really want to break through and get that Final Four. And McKinley Wright's the feel-good story, the senior point guard who wants to guide this Colorado team that's been deprived of some basketball success. I think that'll be a great game, a really tight battle down to the end. And then the last one is one I'm actually going to later today is LSU Michigan. I think Michigan without Livers is a little bit on upset watch, and I think LSU is just as talented as most teams in the country, and I think they just had some consistency issues throughout the year, which is why they were an 8 seed, and they're showing now kind of their potential, what they could be. So I think LSU might catch Michigan off guard, and we could potentially see a really exciting finish there.
Just a few more questions for you, Jackson, then I'll let you go. And since you got to go up to Indy to actually watch a game, that's pretty exciting.
I'm pumped.
Baylor and Gonzaga, I think probably the 2 favorites right now. Illinois was one of them. They're gone. If you had to pick a champion, though, right now, and it wasn't Baylor or Gonzaga, who would you pick down to cut down the nets in a couple weeks in Lucas Oil?
That is a really, really tough question because my immediate answer would have been Illinois, but obviously that is now out of consideration. So now I have to get back to the drawing board and really think. I guess going region by region of what we've got left, once again, taking out Baylor, Gonzaga, obviously. Oh gosh, this is tough. Oh man, this is really tough. I would have to say, oh boy, you really.
I put you on the spot here.
Yeah, no, but that's totally fair. It's totally fair. I'm going to try to think this through for a second. Man. Oh gosh. Okay, so let's say Michigan ends up, and I know this isn't fun, it's a 1 seed again. Let's say Michigan gets into form and they beat LSU. There's no worries about the upset. And then they get Livers back the next weekend. And we don't know the status of that, so we'll see. But if that were to happen, I think they would have to be the favorite outside of Gonzaga and Baylor, because I think people have kind of shifted their attention away from just how good Michigan was for a while. They came out of that. I mean, they were really good before the pause, but out of the pause, they were really dominant too. And then they let a few slip. That happens. But I mean, this team, when they're on, is so talented, and they have so many different ways they can score. And, they have so many just the individual talents. Livers is really good. Franz Wagner is a beast. Hunter Dickinson down low. I mean, the kid's 7'1". Not many teams have a 7'1" guy they can throw at them. But obviously the question becomes, does Livers come back? Can they get through LSU unscathed? And, how do they progress from there? But if Michigan can get those things on track, I'd say they'd have to be the next one.
We'll see what the Wolverines can do today. As you mentioned, an interesting matchup against LSU. Two quick questions, one on the IU men, one on the IU women, and then I'll let you go. Obviously, it's been almost exactly 1 week, I think actually now to the hour, since Archie Miller was fired as IU men's basketball head coach. There's been a lot of talk about Brad Stevens over the last week. He's answered a lot of questions. Someone constructed a shrine for him in front of Assembly Hall, which was very interesting to see. I think, though, the assumption is he's not going to come to Bloomington. What are you hearing about who's maybe the most likely candidate right now that Scott Dolson's going to hire?
I think it's so tough to pinpoint, because I feel like, we're hearing one thing and then we're hearing another thing. And then I wouldn't be shocked. I would not be shocked if it's just somebody out of left field. Supposedly, as of late, there's been a few reports that Thad Matta and Mike Woodson are being targeted. And, Mike Woodson, played here, was really successful here, used to be the Knicks head coach, is an assistant coach in the NBA now. And then Thad Matta coached at Ohio State and Butler, and has a really tremendous resume in the college game. But he's been out of retirement, for a couple of years now. And I just don't see either of those as realistic fits. And it's nothing against either candidate. Woodson, he's always been an NBA guy for his coaching tenure. He's never really done the college thing, which, granted, that's what people were saying about Juwan Howard, and look at Michigan now. So that's one thing to consider. And then Thad Matta retired for health reasons. I just think it's a little bit unrealistic to kind of take him out if that's the reason he left the game. And maybe he's feeling better and he can do that. But I think that, and some people are very split on this, but I think the most likely, and I'm not saying this is the most likely because it's the absolute number one best option, even though I think it might be the best option, is John Beilein, who used to coach at Michigan. I think that for John Beilein, I understand that he's a little bit on the older end for coaches, but there's two things that I think really could strike a flame in him and want him to come back into coaching. Other than the fact that it's the Indiana job, it's the Big Ten, he'll get paid very well. It's the fact that he, left the Cavaliers in his 1 year there abruptly in the middle of the season, did not go well. The team was terrible, and it kind of left a stain on his coaching career. So I don't know if he wants to be remembered for that. And then, not that he has a vendetta against Michigan or Howard or anything, but, Howard goes to Michigan and is already having massive success, both on the court and in the recruiting trail, to the point where Michigan looks like they're going to be a power, like a top 5 team for years to come. And I mean, Beilein was really good at Michigan, but he didn't have that consistent top tier success every single season. So it's almost like he wants to say, like, hey, like, I'm just as good. Like, maybe he wants to go back and improve himself even more. And he never got that national title. He got to the Final Four twice, got to 2 national title games, but he never won it. So I'm curious if he's got to fire him to go get it. I don't think Scott Drew or Chris Beard are realistic, just because they're both at really good places, and obviously they've had a lot of success there. So I don't know why they would leave something. And I get it's the Indiana job, but they've got something really good going. I mean, Baylor's a 1 seed, and Texas Tech with Beard has already been to a national championship game. I feel like it's hard to take them out of those situations where they're so comfortable. And I have a hard time as well seeing Indiana go the mid-major route, just because it spurned them with Archie the last time, no matter how good Porter Moser's been as of late. I think Beilein is the most realistic candidate, but like I said, anything's possible, and it could be something totally out of left field.
I'll finish with this on the IU women's basketball team. They are actually, I saw the last team in Indiana, men's or women's, playing in the NCAA tournament, which is pretty remarkable. They start their tourney run today against the 13 seed VCU, 2:00 Eastern time down in San Antonio. How far do you think they're going to go?
I think that, and I'm not trying to jinx the Indiana women, so I don't want to put any bad juju out there for predicting, but I think that at the minimum, a Sweet 16 is totally reasonable. I think this group has been good all year, and they've had to face some adversity with some transfers and such. But they're a very consistent product, and I think they're very motivated after not having a tournament last year and having another really good year. They were going to be probably about a 4 seed, last year as well. So I think they want to prove themselves, and I definitely think they can make the Sweet 16. And from there, I'm not going to rule anything out. I know this is kind of uncharted territory, highest seed for this team in program history so far, but they play NC State, who would be the 1 seed theoretically if that's what it ended up matching up to be in the Sweet 16. And as good as NC State is, it's no disrespect to them. They got lucky in the fact that they're not, I guess, facing a more traditional power in women's college basketball like a UConn for that 1 seed in the region. So without that factor in it, I think that there is a path to have a run, but I think it's just about getting those tournament jitters out, taking care of VCU, and just doing what they have to do, because once again, this is a little bit uncharted territory, being hunted rather than the hunter. But I mean, Terry Morin's proven to be a really great coach, and they got one NCAA tournament win 2 years ago to get to the round of 32 before losing. I think this team is ready to take the next step, and I think the second weekend is very reasonable at the minimum.
Going to be fun to watch for Terry Morin's squad.
Certainly.
They start their journey this afternoon. And Jackson, really appreciate you coming on today. Great insight. Have fun at the Michigan game up in Indy later today, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Griffin. It's been a blast. Thank you for having me on.
That will do it for today's episode of Unpaid Interns. As always, if you've missed any of today's episode or any of our past episodes, you can check them out on the IU Sports Media YouTube or Twitter page, or you can listen to them wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back for another episode on Wednesday, so check in then on the IU Sports Media channel for our next guest and show. Till then, for Jackson Yeary, I'm Griffin Epstein. Thanks so much for tuning in. Talk to you again on Wednesday.